Hi, this is Kathy from Gadgets Top 321, and in today's video, I'm going to take a look at my currently inked pens. Now, I know I just recently said that in my current stage of life, one inked up pen is ideal for me, and that is still true, and this just verifies it again. But I've had fun with each of these pens, and I'll take just a minute to do a writing sample with each one and talk about what I have liked and maybe not liked about each. First, I've got my TWSBI Vac 700R that I was given as a gift. It's got an extra fine stainless steel nib on it that has this beautiful iris treatment. Now, this extra fine nib, when I would write with it, well, I guess when I first got it, the tines may have been just slightly out of a line, so I just kind of fiddled with those a little bit and used some micro mesh on it. And at that point, when I would write with it, there wasn't anything that I could say was specifically wrong with it. It just didn't have any character. The feedback of the nib on paper, it wasn't super smooth, but I wouldn't have called it feedbacky. There was nothing special about it. And I was just dying to make this into a really fine stub nib. I've done that before on a Platinum Preppy, and it turned out really nicely, and I enjoy writing with that really fine stub nib. And I was wanting to do that with this pen, but I was scared to because it has such a nice nib. I was afraid if I messed it up, I wouldn't be able to replace the nib. But as I wrote with it, I said, I've got to do something to this pen. So I used a whetstone for the initial grinding of the nib, flattening it out. I used this ceramic stone for the initial smoothing of the nib. And I also use this ceramic stone if I have a nib that is too glassy smooth. I use this to rough it up just a little bit. If it gets a little too rough, then I can use the micro mesh on it and just kind of go back and forth to get it just right. But like I said, I used that ceramic stone to kind of start smoothing it out, and then the micro mesh for the final smoothing. And I got it to a point that I thought I liked it, but one edge was a little too rough, so I worked on it a little bit more, and then I was scared that I got it too broad, and I thought, well, you know, it's still, by stub standards, it's still really fine, but I worked on it a little bit more, and now I've got it. For me, it is perfect. I'll zoom in a little bit and show you what it looks like. Here's that nib. I really enjoy writing with this nib, just the way it looks and now the way it feels. Just the right amount of wetness for this fine-ish kind of nib. Now I can feel it as I write getting a little drier, and I'm still getting used to opening up the plunger a bit, but I like the wetness of this pen and ink combination. I'm not as fond of Mirasaki-shikibu in drier nibs. I know it's pretty, this pale-ish kind of lavender ink. Maybe you would call that lavender, but I really like it when it's darker like this. And let's take a look at the reverse writing. For me, that's a really nice extra fine. You can see it's writing pretty dry, but it doesn't feel dry. So I like that. Let me see. I didn't show you the the line variation of the regular writing. I would call this a Japanese medium, and I would call this maybe a Japanese fine or extra fine. So that is a nice amount of line variation. And there's no scratchiness in any direction. I would call the feedback like a Sailor or a Platinum medium feedback. And it appears to be the same amount of wetness in every direction. I just really like this pen now. Here's the original writing, the original extra fine, compared to the new stub nib that I turned it into. Another thing I like about it is I've had no problems with it drying out. The cap seal on this pen is excellent. You can see there's a spring up here. So similar to the platinum slip and seal, you can see that spring compressing when you close the pen up. It's just been a really fun pen to write with. Now, the only thing I would say that even comes close to me not liking about it is that it's, compared to the pens I normally use, this is kind of big and chunky, but it's still smaller than the Penlux Masterpiece Grande. You can see how it compares to a Lamy logo. So it's not a chunky pen, but it's a little bit chunky by my standards. I have this rickshaw pen sleeve that I bought when I got my Pilot Custom 74. I think this is the long size, and it fits just perfect. I mean, you wouldn't want it to be any longer. You wouldn't want the pen to be any longer, but it fits this just perfectly. And I carry it in my purse in a pocket vertically like this. I've had no issues with any leaking, but that brings me to the Penlux. I decided to go ahead and ink up the Penlux with Robert Oster African Gold after testing it with this pen. I really liked it, so I took out the shimmer ink, the KWZ Big Muddy. I really liked it in this pen, but that shimmer, after inking it up for a second time, it was starting to, cause some issues. So I inked it up with African Gold, which is another kind of earthy golden color ink, kind of in that same vein. And I've been writing with it a little bit each day. It also, I keep in my purse in a pocket vertically, and I noticed just the other day some ink has gotten back behind the piston. Now, given the pattern in this material, it's noticeable, but not like doesn't stand out too much. My only problem is I worry about it since I keep it in my purse vertically like this. I worry about it possibly at some point leaking out and making a mess in my purse. So I think this pen will probably end up, I guess I could put, I don't know. I don't know if I have let me see. I don't think it fits in this rickshaw large sleeve. No, it's too girthy to fit in here. Well, yeah, with the clip makes it not fit. So I could probably find some kind of sleeve and just set it in my purse horizontally, let it lay in my purse. But for now, I think this is going to be more of a desk pen. But I've enjoyed this pen and ink combination very much. This has shown me that I do kind of like broad nibs for some applications. Just a slight skip there at the beginning. Not bad. And I've got this inked up with Robert Oster African Gold. Now, one thing I'm noticing here, it was writing a bit darker on this first line. I could kind of feel it as I was writing that it felt like it might, actually, it didn't feel like, it looked like it might be getting a bit drier, writing a bit drier. But comparing these two right now, it's not overly obvious. Maybe it's just a character of this ink. This is one of those inks that if you're writing like in cursive or something, it will drag the ink to the end of the pen stroke. Let's see. Because this, you've only got that one little spot of the darker shade. Now you see me just sitting here talking, it kind of dried up a little bit. But it started back up pretty quickly. Well, a little bit of a skip there. A little bit dry. Let's see what reverse writing looks like. That feels really nice. I don't think I had to do anything with the reverse writing. I don't remember if I had to smooth that any. I know on the TWSBI, I had to smooth it with some micromesh just a little bit on the reverse writing. And that was due in part because the tines were just slightly out of alignment. So I realigned them and then smoothed the front and back just a little bit. But I'm liking this pen and ink combination, but it does look like, you can tell this is a little bit drier. Well, I don't know. Maybe it is. I'm leaning toward now thinking it's just, if you write in cursive, you're dragging a lot of the ink down to the end of the pen stroke, because when I was just doing these lines and dashes, you can see. And since I tend to print, you're seeing a lot of shading, a lot of the darker shades in my writing. As I'm stopping and talking, I'm getting some minor hard starts there. But I haven't noticed, since I switched over to this non-shimmer ink, I haven't noticed much trouble with skipping and hard starts in my just everyday writing. I'm really liking this pen and ink combination, especially in this broad nib. It's been really fun. And finally, I've got my Lamy logo that I haven't been writing with much lately at all. And I actually took it to the St. Louis Pen Show and tried to sell it. I took the gold nib off of it. I was going to sell the gold nib separately, and I put the original stainless steel nib back on it. It didn't sell, and I'm kind of glad it didn't, because I got a bunch of replacement nibs in all the sizes that I didn't have, and I used this to test a shimmer ink. And instead of dipping the nib in the shimmer ink like I've always done before, I inked this pen up, inked up the converter, and just swapped out the nibs. And that seemed to work out really well. Now, in order for that to work out as well as it did, I had to take the little middle part out of the feed. It just slides out, so I can replace it if I ever want to use just a regular ink. But this has been working really nicely with the shimmer inks. Taking that middle section out allows more ink flow. There's still like I think it's 2 tiny ink channels, but they're shorter now, so you don't have as much time for the feed to get clogged up with shimmer. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do a writing sample with this. This is the nib that I enjoyed the most, so I put it on there and have been using it. Now, that might be contaminated a little bit. It looks a little yellow. Let me try that again. Now, you can see how pale this ink is when you do the ink smear. If I write just at a comfortable speed, it's not that the feed isn't keeping up. It's just that this is another one of those inks, kind of like this one, that if you write one steady stroke, it drags a lot of the ink down to the end of the stroke, and that end is a bit darker. Well, fortunately for this African gold, the lightest bits of writing are still very legible. But with this, let me see, this is a Wearingeul ink, Wearingeul Daddy Longlegs. And if I write too fast, well, see, that's pretty legible. Let's see. I don't know. If I write too fast, it just feels like there's not enough ink going on the paper. This is one of those inks that makes me want to slow down when I'm writing. Now, I will say, with this nib, this was my favorite. Some of the steel nibs wrote a bit too dry, the extra fine and the fine. I'll have to test those nibs with an ink that I know a little bit more about. Maybe I'll test it out with the Waterman Mysterious Blue and compare them. But the extra fine and fine steel nibs were way too dry to use this ink with. The medium, the broad, the stub nib looked good. The medium, broad, and stub nib all looked good, but the medium felt the nicest out of all the steel nibs. This extra fine, I like it, but I have to make sure I write small and I have to write slower than normal. But once you get the ink on the paper, this is a really pretty shade of ink. And let me show the shimmer. It's subtle, but not too subtle. It's noticeable, very pretty. And one thing I wasn't as fond about it, well, I've already listed a few things that I wasn't as fond of, but in this converter, it doesn't have an ink agitator. So right now, the ink is stuck up at the front. Let me tap it. Okay, you can see it fell back to the back. It's a pretty ink to look at. That it looks like a red ink. It looks red when you're just looking at the ink with that gold shimmer in it, and the shimmer moves pretty freely in there. So you don't really need you don't really need an ink agitator to keep the shimmer agitated. You just have to move the pen around, and it mixes pretty quickly. The problem is you need an ink agitator to keep the ink from getting stuck. Otherwise, you have to remember to tap it to get the ink to flow back down to come into contact with the feed. And one thing I learned, when you don't have that little middle section in the feed, it's a lot easier for ink to drip out when you're shaking the pen. So I'm still learning. This is probably going to be a pen that I just use for ink tests now, mostly for shimmer inks. And I don't think I had ever pulled a Lamy feed out. Maybe I had by accident, but I'm happy to know now that you can easily take them apart, put them back together, get that feed really cleaned out after using a shimmer ink. This has been a fun and successful experiment. Okay, so I'm going to go get this pen cleaned up, or maybe I'll do a little journaling and then clean it up, use up some of that last little bit of ink. This ink back behind here, I want to get that cleaned up. So I need to watch some videos on taking a Penlux apart. I sold my why? I better not. I bet I made a mess. I just turned that piston without thinking. I was thinking about my Vac 700. You can do that with the Vac 700. Okay, I didn't make a mess. I'm probably going to empty this out, watch some videos, get in here and clean that out. And from now on, when I use it, I'll leave the pen. I'll store the pen horizontally. So far, no problems keeping this one stored vertically, so I'm going to leave this pen inked up. I'm enjoying journaling and writing with this. I got let's see, what is the name of this? It's a TWSBI Vac 20A ink bottle. It's for using with the Vac 700 and the Vac Mini. One way you attach the pen to it with this. I think, I'm not sure which one, maybe that's for the Vac 700, and then I'll read the directions before I use it. Maybe this is for the Vac Mini. I'm not sure which is which. That would make more sense for it to be like that. This is the bigger opening, so I'm sure it's for the bigger pen. But I will read the directions before I use it. And so I'm excited about giving that a try, but it's probably going to be a while. I've used quite a bit of ink, but that's still quite a bit of ink still left in there. And I've got this little small bottle of Mirasaki-shikibu. It's about half full, so it was a little bit more full than that when I inked this pen up the first time, and I had a little bit of trouble. This is as full as I could get it. That's a pretty good size nib, so getting it submerged enough that ink can get up there to the filler hole, that was the best I could do. I probably will not be replacing Mirasaki-shikibu. I've enjoyed using it, but I'd like to try some other inks, not necessarily purple, though I do have some purples that I enjoy. Dusky kind of purples tend to be my favorite, but I might use some Konpeki or maybe some darker teal and turquoise inks. We will see, but all three of these, I would call these successes, even though this one has been the most successful. All right, I'm going to go get these two cleaned up, clean up this little drop of the ink. If you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.